Hello, and welcome to Community Voices, where we talk to Humboldt County's movers and shakers. Today's guest, Colin Fiske from the Eureka Traffic Safety Task Force. And now here's your host, Paul Bressoud.
Hello and welcome to Access Humboldt's Community Voices. My name is Paul Bressoud. I'm your host. Today we're speaking with Colin Fiske, a member of the Traffic Safety Task Force. Colin, I always ask people as we start out, what is the Traffic Safety Task Force and what is your position on that on that board?
So the Traffic Safety Task Force, it's a task force that was formed by Eureka Mayor Susan Seaman, I guess about a year ago now, maybe a little longer. And the intent was sort of to respond to the traffic safety crisis that we see in Eureka particularly, but also more broadly in Humboldt County, by bringing together representatives of all sorts of different local agencies, cities, counties, stakeholders of all kinds, to try and figure out some sort of short-term steps that could be taken to try to improve safety on the streets. And me particularly, I'm the executive director of a local nonprofit organization called the Coalition for Responsible Transportation Priorities, which I know is a mouthful, so you can just call us CRTP. And we advocate for better and safer and healthier and more sustainable transportation, particularly things like walking and biking and taking the bus.
Well, I read I guess it would be, for lack of a better word, a mission statement, making the streets of Eureka safe for all modes of transportation. Explain to me all modes of transportation. Who are you interested in? Who are your constituents here?
I think, all modes of transportation means that it includes not only drivers, but also people who are walking and biking and rolling, using wheelchairs or skateboards or all sorts of other devices, as well as people who are riding the bus. And it's important to specify that because unfortunately, historically, locally, as well as more broadly, I would say in the US, the focus in designing roads and in thinking about the impacts of that design has really been on the drivers primarily for the last 100 years.
Can you explain the term traffic safety crisis? You used that earlier in the interview.
So we view the situation as a crisis for a number of reasons. One is that to emphasize that really it's not normal that so many people die on our roadways, and it is preventable. And the fact that it happens so regularly is not something that we should just sort of accept. Also because nationwide and also locally, over the last 10 to 15 years, the number of particularly pedestrians and bicyclists who have been hit and killed on the streets has actually been increasing, and the interventions so far have not been terribly effective. And so for that reason, we think of it as a crisis.
Do the statistics in Humboldt County, are they greater than other areas in the United States or the average of the United States? Or are we about the same? Are we less?
Unfortunately, in Humboldt County, and particularly in the city of Eureka, it's significantly worse than it is statewide and nationwide. Just to give you an example, the California Office of Traffic Safety releases annual rankings of counties and cities based on the collisions that have been reported to police. And one of those rankings is for pedestrian-related collisions. And Humboldt County ranks number 2 out of all 58 California counties in terms of how dangerous it is for pedestrians. So it's a big problem here.
But we have a problem of that magnitude here in Humboldt County and Eureka specifically. So
yes. You
identify that shocking statistic. What now?
There's a lot that can be done, and it sort of falls into a number of different buckets, if you will. One of the main things that my organization advocates for a lot is street design, which in the traffic safety world is sometimes called engineering solutions. And that's based on how can we redesign the streets to, for example, encourage drivers to drive more slowly, because speed is one of the most important factors in determining outcomes of a collision. And how can we provide more protected infrastructure for vulnerable road users, like people who are walking and biking and don't have that steel and plastic box around them? So that's one of the main ways, and really the evidence shows most of the most effective ways to improve safety fall into that category. But with the Traffic Safety Task Force, the focus was really on a second category, which is public education, because while most of our local jurisdictions are already sort of trying to pursue different engineering type projects to improve safety, those have a longer lead time. And the idea that I think Mayor Seaman had here was, what can we do in the shorter term to try to just improve the culture of safety on the streets and encourage drivers to basically to drive more safely?
So you're talking about changing drivers' behavior. I've noticed signs that have been up all over the county, watch out, drive slow. What are the yellow signs? What is that part of your group? Are you guys putting those up?
Yeah, so those signs came directly out of this task force. They say, go slow, watch the road.
Go slow.
And, yep, and they have a big pair of eyes on them. And so the idea there is when you look at public education campaigns, there's quite a bit of research actually on how do you effectively change people's behavior. And it's quite difficult to do, but there are some things that make it somewhat more effective. One of those things is just having that reminder right in front of people when they're doing the behavior. So that's why we went with, sort of yard signs or signs that you can put right by the road that people can see while they're driving. Another thing is to just emphasize the words that you want people to associate. So to keep it real simple, that's why the word slow is really big. We didn't want to say don't speed, because the research suggests that maybe people might just see the word speed and that might actually encourage them to go faster subconsciously. So we say slow. And the eyes are another thing, another sort of psychological phenomenon that's called implied surveillance, kind of a creepy term, but the idea that when people think that other folks might be paying attention, they're more likely to sort of behave well. And so the idea of those eyes was partly maybe we'll kind of encourage people to subconsciously think that their neighbors are paying attention and that they should drive more responsibly.
Kind of that concept of growing up in the neighborhood and everybody's mom had their eye out the window kind of thing. So exactly. You said it's too early. I mean, too early to know if it's working. Have you had feedback on it? Do people say that this is a good message, seems like a good idea? Are they strategically placed? Or, I don't know if you get immediate feedback on something like that.
Well, we have gotten a lot of feedback, and it's been overwhelmingly positive. And part of the way that we get the feedback is just who comes to take the signs. The signs are free and available for anybody. And so there's been a huge demand for them. And I'm sure folks who, drive, walk, bike around have seen them in their communities. So that's a good sign. As far as whether they are encouraging people to go slowly or not, it's harder to measure that empirically. But one of the things that we are trying to do right now is, choose a particular segment of a particular street and do a speed survey with the cooperation of the local government there, see how fast people are going, and then put out a whole bunch of signs, try to get all the neighbors to, to put signs in their yards, and then wait a few weeks or a month and go back and do another speed survey so you can actually see whether it's having an effect or not. And that's why I say it's too early. We don't have the results from those little experiments yet, but we're hoping to have those soon.
So the one hand is changing behavior, but then what about infrastructure change? What about sidewalk change? What about crosswalk change? What about the kind of projects that a city and municipality can do in order to make it safer for people to be a pedestrian?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, those are, in my mind, really, after reviewing all of the research, those kinds of projects are even more effective at changing people's behavior and at making people safer than these kind of public education things. And as I mentioned, the city of Eureka, the county of Humboldt, the city of Arcata, all those sort of local governments, they all have at least some of these projects in the works. And you might notice things like bulb outs or curb extensions at intersections that limits, it makes the distance that a pedestrian has to cross shorter, makes them more visible to people driving. So those are good. They also make it more difficult to turn a corner without slowing down. All things that improve safety. There's things, of course, like putting in protected bike lanes. There's a big project that we've been advocating for and working with Caltrans and the city of Eureka on Broadway to implement protected bike lanes and sidewalk improvements and things like that. So these projects are going on. I would say a lot more is needed. And one of the things that personally I'm hoping is that the success and popularity of this campaign with the signs will help to build support for more of those projects, because sometimes those projects aren't that popular. Like if it requires removing some parking, for example, people might object to that. And so what I'm hoping is that we can really build a culture of supporting street safety as the top priority for our road design.
Can you tell me about the Broadway multimodal corridor plan? Is that kind of what you're alluding to here?
Yeah, so there was a corridor planning process, as they call it in Caltrans lingo, and that wrapped up a year and a half ago. And one of the results of that was a recognition that we need, although there are sort of big ideas for what could be done over the long term, we really need to implement near-term safety improvements on Broadway to save lives, because I mentioned that Eureka and the county are some of the most dangerous for pedestrians in the state, and Broadway and the 101 corridor in Eureka generally is the most dangerous corridor in the area by far, when you look at just the number of people who are hit and injured and killed. So coming out of that, there's two major projects being planned for Broadway. One of them is sort of the south part of Broadway around the mall and then down to about Herrick Avenue. And then the other one is basically north of the mall up to the 4th and 5th Street couplet. And both of those projects are aiming to complete the sidewalk network, add protected bicycle facilities, add additional pedestrian crossings where there currently aren't any, because that's a big problem that people don't want to have to sort of walk a half mile out of their way to cross the street, and so they end up running across. Improving the intersections to make them safer, reducing points of conflict by removing some of the extra driveways that might exist, things like that. And I'm really excited that the South Broadway one has actually been fully funded by the state, so hopefully that'll happen relatively quickly. And the rest of the corridor, the planning is in the works, but the actual construction and engineering is not funded yet. So, but Caltrans has really opened up this process to include stakeholders like my group, CRTP, and the city of Eureka and other agencies in this early planning process. So we've been really hopeful that something is going to happen before too long.
Seems like an obvious question, but is that the most important component, the funding from the state?
I would say funding is one of the most important components, because there's a lot of, there are a lot of projects that all of our local agencies have on the books, so to speak, that would improve safety. that are just waiting for funding. I think some would argue that an equally important feature is the actual design of the project, because sometimes it doesn't actually improve safety all that much, and you have to kind of be up on the current research and make sure that it's that it's going to do what it's supposed to do. But yes, funding is a huge issue.
Now, is your group making the recommendations as what they need, what funding they would ask for? Or do you give ideas to the city and then the city asks the state?
So in the case of Broadway, it's actually Caltrans because it's a state highway. But in any of these cases, we advocate with the agency, whether it's the city of Eureka or Caltrans or the county of Humboldt or whomever. We advocate for evidence-based safety improvements. And so like a good example of that is what they call protected bike lanes, where there's some sort of a vertical barrier between a bike lane and the car traffic. And there's just a lot of research that shows that those both improve safety for bicyclists and encourage more people to bike, but they also improve safety for drivers as well. So that's just like an all-around great safety improvement. And so, we look for things like that and advocate. And then we are not a public agency. We don't have any official jurisdiction over the roads, so we can't apply for funding for those things. But we do often, submit letters of support and those kinds of things to try and encourage the state to fund these projects.
Speaking of support, does the public weigh in as to what their number one interest is? Are bicyclists a more organized advocate group than, say, pedestrians, than, say, those that drive? I mean, is the public weighing in, and who seems to be the loudest voice?
It's a great question. So it's transportation planning is done at a number of different levels. And so you have these long-term processes. I mentioned, for example, the Broadway multimodal corridor plan, and that was kind of what's the long-term vision for this whole corridor. But then once you have that plan, you have to kind of look for discrete projects that fit within the programs that the state or the federal government has funding for and apply for that and do the specific engineering. And so I would say that at the planning stage, usually there's a fair amount of public input that is, usually it's required. And so they hold meetings and do surveys and things like that. And those things are always going on. Another example is the city of Eureka is about to start developing a bicycle plan for the whole city. And so there will be, opportunities for involvement there. Then when you get to the project level, in my experience, it's a little bit more spotty. Sometimes there are really great public input opportunities, and sometimes historically there have not been. But that's why with Caltrans in particular, I've been encouraged lately that, it used to be that I'd find out about a project 2 years after it was planned and have no idea, it's kind of too late. But lately they've, for the bigger projects, they've really been trying to hold public meetings and invite stakeholders to their internal planning meetings in a way that really makes it a lot more transparent and accessible. So that's a really positive thing. And the cities and the county, I would say, have always been a little better about that. Usually they'll at least be, on a city council agenda or something like that. So if not a special meeting held specifically for a particular project. So you can usually find out if you're paying a little attention.
Now, if we're talking about bicyclists, if we're talking about cyclists, obviously Broadway is the street that you identified as the most treacherous of all to be out on. But, the inside streets of Eureka, is there work also being studied as to how to make those areas safer?
Yeah, there is. And it's going on a number of fronts. I mentioned this bicycle plan that they're about to start, which will sort of hopefully take an overall comprehensive view of the network. And that's really what CRTP, my organization, we recommend taking a network approach, which means kind of looking at how, if I start from any particular point in the city and I'm walking or taking the bus or taking a bike, how do I get to another point in the city in a way that is safe and convenient? And so is there a network that connects all of those places, or are there gaps in the network, or are there barriers? And so Broadway is a great example of a barrier where a lot of people, just don't feel safe crossing Broadway. So they're gonna, if they have to go from one side of Broadway to another, they're gonna drive, and even if it would be otherwise convenient to walk or bike. And so, figuring out those places and trying to address the problems is key to making sure that more people are comfortable walking and biking. But the city of Eureka is also looking at solutions for 6th and 7th Street, for example. They did just recently a bunch of improvements in the Henderson Center area that got some attention. There's this long-term plan, which is, I believe, going to go to construction pretty soon now, for H&I streets to take a traffic lane and add a protected bike lane and do some other pretty significant improvements that should really improve safety in those corridors. So there is a lot going on.
Outstanding. Well, that's about all we have time for today. I want to thank my guest, Colin Fiske from the Public Safety Task Force. Fascinating work. And, not besides just safety, but I mean, more corridors, more pedestrians, more bike riders, better health, better quality of life. So it's an expansive topic. You talk about traffic and you think, well, traffic. But I mean, it could really be a quality of life issue for some of these corridors in town to be connected and people to be able to get from here to there. So I think it's very cool work, worthy work, and I'm glad that you were able to come on the show. So I want to thank my guest, Colin Fiske, for being here. I want to thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time on Community Voices.